Hi guys, and welcome back to this week's episode of Let's Chat Ethics. I'm your co-host Ariana.
And I'm your other co-host Amanda.
And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about sustainability in AI and tech. So we kind of touched on this a bit in the episode where we spoke about Timnit Gebru's wrongful firing from Google, where she had actually co-authored a paper that had looked at the carbon footprint of machine learning models and how, you know, one machine learning model can be as, can have the same carbon footprint as a car in its entire lifetime, which is very, very wild. And the paper that I wanted to discuss today is actually about the financial and sustainable costs on the environment in natural language processing. So obviously we have Amanda here, who is our in-house expert on natural language processing. So I'm sure she can give a deeper analysis on this topic. But yeah, so basically the paper I wanted to talk to you about today, Amanda, is, and I know I've obviously shared it with you beforehand, but it's Energy and Policy Considerations for Deep Learning in Natural Language Processing. And it's by Emma Strubell, Ananya, Ganesh, and Andrew McCallum. And it's coming out of the University of Massachusetts. So the paper looks at the kind of environmental costs of training these models and the financial costs, and the researchers kind of bring together this data and then they bring forward some recommendations. So they kind of propose some actionable steps to reduce these costs and to improve equity in the natural language processing research and practice. So a point that I actually wanted to talk to you about, Amanda, that they bring up in kind of their recommendations is how they speak about how actually to train these models, it costs a substantial amount, and that this obviously means that it's not completely equitable. Not everyone can afford to do this training for the machine learning models. And also obviously the environmental impact and how, you know, most researchers have to turn to kind of the big tech to use the cloud, but cloud costs a lot more money than doing it other ways in terms of maybe from government funding or a public body. And, you know, this obviously leads to, they were kind of saying this cycle of the rich gets richer. And yeah, this is clearly an issue that I think needs to be discussed and put forward. So I think overall it's a really, really great paper. So we'll definitely link this below for everyone so you can all read it. But yeah, Amanda, what are your thoughts on, you know, making academic research more equitable and kind of having this access to computation resources?
Yeah, that's quite interesting. And I think, we've talked about, but people have talked about the problem of sort of inequality, I guess, across institutions or people who are trying to get into machine learning. And a lot of the time is to do with the value of data. And, you know, obviously the bigger companies have more data, and so they can train better models because usually more data is more better. But in terms of actually also having the resources to access the actual, I guess, hardware to train these models, that's true. It's also something expensive, and it's something that you need to take into account. So I know that some companies, I think NVIDIA, they actually will sort of donate some GPUs and stuff to university researchers, which helps with obviously the costs of that. But, you know, even if you have a GPU, you obviously need the rest of the machine that goes along with it. So it's definitely a problem. I mean, usually, you know, bigger, more well-known universities will have also, I'm speaking about universities, but I think this will probably also go along for companies. I know that a common thing to use is, I guess, AWS, so Amazon Web Services, and yeah, it's horribly expensive. I don't think I can talk too much about numbers, but I remember in our experience when I worked with that, the costs. I mean, we're talking about thousands and thousands every month to run. Yeah,
Wow. That's
yeah,
insane.
and that's the monetary cost. But there's also the problem of the footprint in terms of the environment, right? So this paper and Timnit's paper was citing other work, and I think so. This paper's from 2019. I don't remember if this was the paper that I had in mind, or if there was another one even before this where they were talking about the carbon footprint of training machine learning models. And it's pretty crazy, especially because all the machine learning we have, that's kind of like the end result, right? But before you've done that, you've trained a bunch of different models. Even when you're like sort of developing your model, you obviously keep retraining things. You use a lot of energy, and maybe that's something that we should consider more. I know that everybody's right now on the like, you should eat less beef and more beans and that kind of thing. Maybe recycle more, but maybe we need to look at the cost of I guess the environmental costs of machine learning.
Yeah, because I think from like the research I've like been reading and looking at, or this paper particularly said it kind of promotes the rich get richer cycle, with, like you were saying, it being kind of inequitable for not everyone can afford to kind of use these services. But also I think, remember the episode we spoke about the Green Hoodie project, Big Tobacco and Big Tech? I feel like this kind of fuels into that whole cycle of, well, obviously, you can criticize a bit AI ethics researchers going to big tech for funding, but how are they going to do this research in the first place? It's kind of like, it seems like it's this kind of vicious cycle, isn't it? The researchers need the funding, so then they have to, big tech have the money, but then big tech also have a big carbon footprint, but then they need to use their cloud to be able to do this research in the first place, which kind of, it seems crazy. I'm wondering if a solution could be government funding for academic researchers, because I feel like we obviously can get funding from private institutions, but I think that's, like we said, that can come with a conflict of interest. That comes with a conflict of interest, really, because if you're going to, like we said in the big hoodie projects, the big tech have, and like Google showed, didn't want Timnit to publish research that literally showed how the impact of the machine learning models from Google and how that affected the environment. So yeah, I'm just wondering if like academic research could be funded by government. Could that be a potential solution? And I wonder if that would actually work.
I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of government funding already, especially for things like computer science, right? I think most European and I guess North American governments have it as some of their sort of goals or aims is to really fund artificial intelligence and all of that, right? Much more than
yes.
But I think the funding there is ultimately always much more limited than it is in industry, right? So I know that when you're working in industry, obviously you still will have a budget that you need to stick to, but those are usually much more generous. Whereas in industry, in academia, that is not funded through private companies, then you always have to work, like the budget overall is smaller. So it would be great to have more of that. I also wonder if there's other solutions, like I think so. Timnit's paper was talking a lot about, and I think these papers as well. So I want to give credit to all the authors that have taken part in this research, right? But the idea here is that the really large, for example, the really large language models, use up more energy and produce more carbon than, like, what was it, all the cars over 5 years or something like that.
Oh no, it was I think it was one that it was like it uses as much, like one machine learning model can use up to as much carbon as like a car in its whole lifetime or something, which is wild.
Like it's crazy. And these are things that we're like retraining constantly and constantly trying to create bigger and bigger models, right? And so I wonder if, like, on the one hand, the nice thing about these models is that, you know, they're pre-trained, and so essentially almost kind of like trained once, and then everybody can use them and you can fine-tune them and all of that, but the bulk of the training is done. So that's kind of good, but at the end of the day, you're always retaining these things. And I wonder if we should try to take this more into account when we're developing a system. You know, what is it like? I don't know, something that's been a little bit related to this that's been kind of weighing on my mind was, and to be clear, I don't have sources for this, but I'm sure we could find them. But essentially, you know, with all these smart speakers and smart homes and stuff, it takes, like, I think 10 times as much energy to ask Alexa to switch on the light than it does to just switch the light on yourself. And so that's something that kind of, like, has definitely been weighing on my mind, because obviously I do research on Alexa and other systems like that, and I don't mean specifically Alexa. So all these systems, they use up a lot more energy to do simple tasks like this or setting a timer than it would to just sort of do it locally, right? Like, you could take up your phone and
do it yourself,
set a timer, instead of having your Google Home send your voice to the Google servers across the ocean or across the country and process that and then send it back and give the signal to set a timer.
I think this might fall under the fact that people generally don't understand that, do they?
Yeah, we need to really, I think about that a little bit. And I don't think I'm not saying that these technologies shouldn't be developed, but, you know, something to consider as well is the impact that these things have. So especially, I think now, like I said, we are constantly being bombarded with, like, climate change and all the problems that it's going to have. And, you know, I live in a coastal town that, with the rising sea levels, is probably going to be significantly underwater. And yeah, I think it's a big problem that I think a lot of people don't
take seriously.
Yeah, and it's very easy when you're developing your machine learning models. It's very easy to just think, oh, let me just, like, retrain it and, like, test hundreds of parameters. But maybe, you know, I'm not saying don't do the research, but try to be a little bit smarter about it.
Yeah, and I saw from the paper they were saying that more academic researchers are now putting, you know, the carbon footprint on their papers at conferences and stuff, and are stating, like, how much energy it took to do, which is great. However, that stating how much energy you've used is great, but I think now it's probably, I obviously don't have the answers right now, but I'm like, I feel like there needs to be more funding into academic researchers actually finding what the solution is to this problem. So, like, do you know what I mean? Instead of just stating, like, my model took X amount of energy, I think we now probably need the funding into academic researchers who are actually going to spend their entire time researching how we can actually continue to have these machine learning models, but actually without the significant environmental impacts. Because I think, like what you were just saying, I think it's human nature anyway, just if anything in the world, that we, like, and this is why I don't think the global warming necessarily gets taken as seriously as it should do, because, you know, for example, you're in the UK, if something bad happens in China per se, it's like, oh no, and then you just get on with your daily life, and because it doesn't affect your immediate sphere. And that's the same with global warming, isn't it? Like, everyone keeps hearing global warming. We've been hearing about it forever. Like, even my mum's, like, in her day, Al Gore was, like, a big leader in global warming, talking about this. And we're still kind of not really doing enough, not just in AI, but worldwide, to global warming. And that's because I think human nature is you don't really, unless you're feeling the direct impacts of something, you're not going to take it serious. And global warming feels like this kind of overwhelmingly like futuristic type problem, kind of what we were talking about with AI and the robots. It's like a long-term problem. And it's just kind of one of those things where it's like, oh, well, that sounds like my great-grandchildren's problem. So, and it doesn't, I think until we necessarily see and feel the effects, I don't know, I think it's easy for people to turn a blind eye.
Yeah, and I think maybe one of the solutions, with like flying, I think it's something else that a lot of people are not necessarily shamed for, but it's something that's really talked about in terms of its carbon footprint, right? It's like flying is so bad for the environment, you should take the train whenever possible, for example, or just avoid going anywhere.
And make the trains cheaper, UK.
For one, make the trains cheaper. But, one of the ways that people are trying to mitigate the effects of flying on the environment is with like carbon offsets. So maybe part of the funding in like research projects, both in industry and in academia, would be to put that funding towards buying the necessary carbon offsets for the models that you've trained. And I want to clarify that I don't really understand carbon offsets too well, so it might be that this doesn't really work, or it only helps a little bit, and of course there's a lot more problems than just the carbon offsets. But in my mind as a consumer, carbon offsets fix most problems with flying. But something an equivalent to that, and definitely funding more research into sustainable AI. And I also wanted to talk about a separate part of sustainability. Okay. Yeah, so a second aspect to sustainability is sustainability in society. And so, you've got certain ways that people act that are not sustainable, in the sense that, I don't know, if you mistreat your workers, then eventually they're going to quit, and then that's obviously not a sustainable practice, right? So if you've got like big staff turnaround. So if we kind of like extend that to AI, if your company or whatever are building AI that has negative effects on society, so beyond the environment but actually on people, then there's also that aspect to it being unsustainable. Or if your technology maybe depends on data that is obtained illegally or unethically, when the regulation changes, or you want to expand the market of your product, then you're going to have that problem as well, right? Or if you're training a model that's too expensive to run, that could also be
kind of like going back to the paper through that. Well, I was just thinking about the whole fact that it's not really sustainable to have models that are only being funded or trained by people who have the money. It doesn't seem, it's not it's like not a fair way of actually doing things, is it? It's like,
I think it also like sort of stifles innovation, right?
And it could be and I guess it could be, which is something you and I always get onto, but classist as well, considered very classist, isn't it, really, that you need money to be able to be involved in these projects, and also it also means that you're not being, I guess, represented in this work for the sustainable use of this product as well.
Ultimately I guess it always ends up coming down to the money and who has the money, and can you convince people to give you the money if you don't have it.
Honestly, that capitalist system we live in. Oh my goodness. Oh gosh. You know what, I think we're up on our time.
Okay, let's wrap it up there. Thank you very much for listening.
So if you want to follow us on social media, we're at Let's Chat Ethics on Twitter, and if you want to drop us an email if you have any recommendations or things you want us to talk about, we're at let'schatethics@gmail.com.
Bye.
We'll see you next week. Thank you.